The protagonist of the movie is a young boy named Desmond Doss, who lives with his family in the countryside. His father, Tom, is a retired Army and a war veteran who managed to come back alive from Europe. But due to the traumatic experiences he went through, he is now a troubled person. He usually drinks and beats his family unnecessarily. This has taken a toll on the children, especially Desmond, who is always grumpy and difficult to handle. One day, while he and his younger brother Hal are playing, they get into an argument. In the heat of the moment, Desmond picks up a brick and strikes his brother's head, rendering him unconscious. As the parents rush in to check the boy, Desmond realizes his mistake and becomes overwhelmed with remorse. He fears that he is going to lose his brother, so he stands in front of an image of their deity and starts praying. Fortunately, Hal survives the incident and eventually forgives his brother, although he's now got the brain capacity of Steven Seagal. The movie then cuts to 15 years later, and we see that Desmond is now a grown-up man. He is no longer the arrogant and rude boy that he once was. In contrast, Desmond is caring and polite and always trying to help others. One day, while working at a church, he witnesses an accident where a man sustains severe injuries. Acting swiftly, Desmond rushes to the scene and uses his belt to wrap the victim's wound before transporting him to the hospital. Upon arrival, the doctor commends Desmond for his prompt first aid, revealing that it saved the man's life. If the belt hadn't been wrapped around his wound, he probably would have died due to loss of blood. Just then, Desmond's attention is captivated by a beautiful nurse named Dorothy Shute. Instantly smitten, he decides to donate blood as a means to initiate conversation with her. After this, Desmond begins visiting the hospital frequently, using various excuses to cross paths with Dorothy. One day, he finally asks her out, and the pair enjoys their first movie date. They also end up kissing, which marks the start of their relationship. One evening, while dining together, Hal shares his decision to enlist as a soldier for the Second World War, motivated by a desire to contribute to their nation. However, his dad, Tom, immediately rejects the idea. He recounts the harrowing deaths of his closest friends, saying war brings nothing but more problems. But the following morning, Desmond shockingly reveals his own intention to enlist. This worries Tom, as he dreads the possibility of his son meeting a fate similar to that of the fallen comrades. However, Desmond reassures his father that he intends to serve as a combat medic, driven by a desire to heal rather than to kill. After this, Desmond shares his decision with Dorothy, causing her to become upset. In order to cheer her up, Desmond unexpectedly proposes marriage to her, and she gladly accepts. After a few days, Desmond is called up for training at an army camp. Prior to his departure, Dorothy presents him with a Bible containing a photograph of herself, comparing herself to Jesus. A little bit cocky, she wants him to hold it close to his heart whenever he feels lonely and scared. In the next scene, Desmond arrives at Fort Jackson, where he encounters several fellow participants for the same journey. Soon after, a strict sergeant named Howell walks in and talks with each recruit, boldly insulting their faces. This makes Desmond realize that life in the military is not going to be easy, given that he has a strange face. The next day marks the commencement of their training, during which Desmond demonstrates remarkable skill and agility. However, when the time comes for rifle training, he refuses to touch the weapon. Desmond claims that he is enlisted to serve as a medic, not a soldier. Expectedly, the sergeant gets angry and chastises him for disobeying his orders. Desmond is then taken to Captain Glover's office, where the latter explains the importance of rifle training. Glover mentions that in war, every single person must know how to use a weapon. However, Desmond still remains adamant in his decision. He says that he vowed to never hurt anyone, and he is going to keep that promise. Unfortunately, this doesn't sit well with the captain, and he orders Desmond to undergo a psychiatric evaluation. The plan is to deem him unfit and expel him from the military. Later that night, while engrossed in his Bible, Desmond is approached by a fellow soldier named Smitty, who snatches the book away and tries to initiate a fight, but Desmond simply ignores him and goes to sleep. The next day, he undergoes the psychiatric evaluation, during which an officer inquires if he experiences any hallucinations. In response, Desmond explains that he's a devout believer in God and that he is not insane. Following the evaluation, the officer talks with the captain, conveying that Desmond cannot be discharged as his religious beliefs don't count as mental illness. He can serve as a combat medic as long as he continues to excel in his other areas of training. This decision infuriates the captain, prompting him to subject Desmond to hard labor in an attempt to drive him away from the barracks. The sergeant also vents his anger on the other soldiers, indirectly implying that Desmond is to blame. As a result of this, poor Desmond gets beaten up by Smitty and a few others. The following morning, when the sergeant enters the quarters, he notices Desmond's bruised face. This time, he talks to the boy politely and suggests that he give up. However, Desmond refuses to leave and doesn't even disclose the names of the comrades that beat him up. Several days later, the soldiers complete their basic training, granting them a period of leave. Desmond plans to use this time to marry Dorothy. Unfortunately, at the last moment, his request for leave is denied, and he is arrested for refusing to carry a firearm. In the cell, the captain visits Desmond, attempting to persuade him to plead guilty in order to secure his release without charges. However, our protagonist refuses to compromise his beliefs. Even when his soon-to-be wife Dorothy asks him to plead guilty, he refuses. Desmond says that his faith in God is the biggest gift he has in life, so he is never going to change. Following this, Dorothy contacts Desmond's parents and informs them about the circumstances. As a result, Tom arrives at the training camp, dressed in his old uniform, and insists on meeting his former commanding officer, who now holds the rank of general. The scene then shifts to the court-martial proceedings, where Desmond pleads not guilty. The opposing party argues that soldiers who don't obey commands can no longer be trained. Nonetheless, Desmond responds by affirming his desire to save lives rather than engage in killing. Just before the final verdict is announced, Tom bursts into the room, presenting a letter from a brigadier general. The letter declares that Desmond's beliefs are protected by the U.S. Constitution, asserting that an individual's righteousness cannot be the basis for judgment and punishment. With this, the judge dismisses the case against Desmond, granting him permission to continue his training as a medic. He is also exempted from the weaponry training. The same evening, Desmond wastes no time and gets married to Dorothy. As they spend their romantic time, he promises to return from war unharmed, even though not carrying a pistol all but ensures he's going to get shot in the face. After a few days, Desmond and his unit receive their assignment to the 77th Infantry Division and are deployed to Okinawa, Japan. Upon arrival, the harsh reality of war quickly hits them as they witness fellow soldiers in decomposing states. Hundreds and thousands of men have already perished, and several are either captured or missing. Later, the group is joined by surviving soldiers from the 96th Infantry Division, which had been tasked with capturing and securing Hacksaw Ridge. The soldiers reveal that they have tried ascending the ridge several times, but the task is nearly impossible, as the Japanese army always has the upper hand. Every time someone goes near the ridge, they're showered with a barrage of bullets and grenades. The revelation scares the new soldiers, as they were not anticipating such a difficult task. Fortunately, Desmond knows how to spin kick grenades. The next day, they reach Hacksaw Ridge, a treacherous cliff currently taken over by the Japanese. It appears that the ridge is very crucial for the Americans, as a victory here could deal a heavy blow to Japan's ambitions. After this, Captain Glover orders the U.S. Navy to launch missiles over the cliff's summit, forcing the Japanese soldiers to seek shelter in bunkers below the ground. Seizing the opportunity, the U.S. Army begins the ascent of the ridge. But as soon as they reach the top, the enemies resurface and open fire, resulting in the deaths of several American soldiers. As the war rages on, Desmond courageously begins to serve the wounded soldiers, taking them down the ridge while risking his own life. On several occasions, he narrowly escapes capture and death at the hands of Japanese soldiers. His best friend at this time is Smitty, the same guy who bullied him during training days. After a grueling and intense battle, the Japanese army retreats inside their bunkers. As a result, the U.S. Army decides to dig in and camp on the spot. They plan to conquer the remaining parts of the ridge the following morning. At dawn, a large group of Japanese soldiers suddenly emerges from hiding, launching a fierce counterattack on the unsuspecting Americans. Witnessing the overwhelming enemy presence, the sergeant orders a retreat, instructing the soldiers to descend the cliff. However, it's not possible to rescue everyone, so many members of the U.S. Army lose their lives, and some are left wounded on the battlefield, including the sergeant himself. In the midst of the chaos, Smitty is also shot, and his life slips away, despite Desmond's desperate attempts to save him and move him to safety. In the next scene, the captain orders the Navy to launch airstrikes on the ridge. Taking advantage of this opportunity, he and the soldiers then make their way down the cliff. Once safely descended, the captain realizes that only 32 soldiers have made it out unharmed, so he directs the injured ones to the base camp for medical attention. Unbeknownst to everyone, Desmond is still on top of the cliff, where he hears the desperate cries and pleas for help from his fellow soldiers. Believing that it's God's will, Desmond disregards the option to retreat and instead heads on a courageous rescue mission. He administers morphine to the injured soldiers, providing them with relief, and proceeds to drag them to the edge of the ridge. With the assistance of ropes, he then lowers them down to safety and saves their lives. Meanwhile, at the base camp, Captain Glover talks to another captain, proposing that the missile attack be halted due to the presence of over 100 stranded U.S. soldiers at the top. As the missiles stop, the Japanese soldiers emerge from their bunkers, intending to eliminate any surviving Americans. But despite this, Desmond George remains unfazed. He takes cover beneath a deceased soldier's body and hides himself. Once the soldiers move to another direction, Desmond gets up and resumes his heroic effort to save the wounded. However, his actions don't go unnoticed for long, as he is soon discovered by the enemy, who unleashes a hail of gunfire in his direction. In an attempt to save himself, Desmond seeks refuge inside of a tunnel filled with numerous corpses. It turns out to be the secret Japanese bunker, which they used for covert operations. Desmond encounters a wounded Japanese soldier there, but instead of running away, he helps the guy by administering first aid on his wounds. Later that night, Desmond gets out of the bunker and resumes his search for fellow wounded soldiers. At this point, he has dedicated himself to saving as many lives as possible. Desmond grows very tired and his hands start bleeding due to the constant work, but he remains resolute and refuses to give up. As dawn breaks, the captain is shocked by the arrival of numerous injured soldiers who were all presumed dead. He is left wondering how this miracle occurred, and one of the soldiers informs him that it's Desmond, who worked tirelessly throughout the night. Upon learning this, the captain and others hastily make their way back to Hacksaw Ridge. Meanwhile, Desmond discovers the injured sergeant and another soldier hiding behind a rock. He carries the soldier on his back to a safe location before returning for the sergeant. During his return, an enemy sniper takes aim at him and fires a shot. Fortunately, the bullet strikes Desmond's metal helmet, sparing him from harm. He then makes a run on purpose to expose the sniper's location, prompting the sergeant to retaliate and eliminate the sniper. Following this, Desmond drags the wounded sergeant towards the cliff, while the latter continues shooting at the enemy forces. Upon reaching the ridge, Desmond secures the sergeant with a rope and lowers him down. He then holds onto the rope tightly until the sergeant reaches safety. Now, with almost everyone rescued, Desmond fastens the rope around himself and jumps off the cliff, taking another soldier with him. Just then, the Japanese soldiers arrive and peer over the ridge, only to face a swift and decisive counterattack from the US forces from below. In the aftermath of the intense battle, Desmond is held by his fellow comrades, who laud him for his bravery and courage. Many of them claim that he is the bravest person they have ever come across. Later, at the camp, while Desmond is reading his Bible, Captain Glover approaches him and expresses an apology for previously underestimating him. He then shares the news that they'll be returning to the ridge the following day, urging Desmond to join them, despite it being his Sabbath. The captain says that the other soldiers aren't willing to fight the war without him. The next day, after completing his prayers, Desmond and his unit ascend once again to confront the enemy. Armed with valuable intelligence about the enemy's secret bunker, the US Army launches a surprise attack, taking no time to neutralize the enemies. Eventually, the Japanese soldiers emerge with a white flag, seemingly surrendering. However, it proves to be a trap, as the supposed surrenderers begin hurling bombs at the US Army. Acting quickly, Desmond valiantly deflects enemy grenades with his hands and feet, sustaining severe injuries in the process. This movie is based on a true story. The US Army then finishes off all the remaining enemies, decisively securing victory in the battle. At last, Desmond is carefully placed on a stretcher and lowered from the cliff for urgent medical assistance. Even at this critical moment, he is still clutching his beloved Bible. The movie then shifts to real photographs and footage, depicting the remarkable life of Desmond. He was awarded the Medal of Honor by President Harry S. Truman for his heroic actions in rescuing 75 soldiers at Hacksaw Ridge. He was also awarded the Punchy Kicky Award by Jackie Chan for spin kicking the shit out of those grenades. Desmond and Dorothy lived a happy married life until Dorothy's passing in 1991. Desmond Doss himself passed away in 2006 at the age of 87, leaving behind a legacy of valor and selflessness. Subscribe for more videos like this, turn on notifications, and leave a like to help the channel out. Thank you for watching.